Good morning, it's a pleasure to be here at Breaking Convention, talking about, the real title of my talk was Ancient Technology, a Modern Perspective. So I'm going to talk about the sweat lodge. Some of you may have done sweat lodges, but I'm going to behave as if none of you ever have, so I'm going to go right back to basics. This is a nice, lovely image of people sitting in a lodge, and as you can see, it's got a very strong image of symbolism there, which is the womb of the mother, the sweat lodge. I'll just go forward to the next slide. Okay. There's a strong history of people coming together in sacred spaces, which we know of that, and the using heat to create a feeling of well-being, opening the heart, and sharing their stories, ideas, and so on. And in addition to that, there's a long history of using heat to treat diseases. Back in ancient Greece, Parmenides, who lived in 540 BCE, he said, "Give me the power to produce fever, and I will cure all diseases." Hippocrates, he was a pupil, he said in 460 BCE, "What the lance will not heal, fire will." And Imhotep in Egypt also mentions heat treatment. Imhotep was a great mystic who built the Pyramid of Saqqara near Giza. And so there's a great reference to all these traditions to gathering in spaces, in kivas, igloos, long barrows, such as we have here. So this is Stony Littleton, and this is Bellis Knapp. And these are places in which people used to place hot rocks in hollows in the flagstones at the bottom of these long barrows in this culture, in this land. And the conventional wisdom is that they used it for cooking, but it seems to me that you would heat up stones also to do purification ceremonies. And also kivas in the USA, in Arizona, and so on. Igloos, the Eskimos have a tradition of this. And it's a planet-wide thing, which we've been rediscovered from the Native American teachings in the modern context, and that's how I came across it. The most sort of well-known example of actual lodges using poles and cloth was the Scythians in southern Russia, which was about 5 BC. There's a reference to this. So lodges have been done for thousands of years. They're usually constructed from willow, ash, hazel or cedar in the modern context. So you create a bender or a dome that's like this, into which you have a pit into which hot stones are placed, water is poured, and then we have a purification ceremony. That's the basics of it, that's the physical basics of it. Blankets or skins are thrown over the structure. I think this is quite an old picture. You can see by the colour, it's probably from the 1800s from the USA. The door can face in any directions. I'll go into that. There are traditions around that. And as you can see here, you can do many kinds of constructions. This is a very typical modern lodge. And the idea is you have the masculine principle, which is the fire, and the feminine or passive principle is the dome, which is like the matrix or the womb of the mother. So the fire, the rocks are heated, they're brought into the lodge, then the water is poured on. And so there's a sense of interpenetration from fire into the mother to, in a sense, fertilize and stimulate the energy in there. And a great amount of energy can be created in there. And for me, the main thing about it is community, building a community. We often do things on our own. We might have our psychedelic experiences in contexts that perhaps the setting isn't always great. And I know in more recent years, I'd say in the last 20 years, the use of psychedelics to me, with things like ayahuasca and so on, has become much more conscious in terms of creating a very harmonious setting. And a sweat lodge is very good for that, because I've done ceremonies where lodges are used before and after peyote or ayahuasca ceremonies, for example. And I know that some of you may have even done rituals with shamans who use that during the lodge. I'm open to that, but I sometimes think less is more. And so my real interest is using the lodge as an alternative to using medicine and so on, although I'm open to it. The jury's out for me on that. So blankets or skins are thrown over, and this is a kind of alchemical or geomantic map, which is quite complicated. But the basic symbolism is that you are in the centre of your circle of life. And so surrounding there, you've got these various archetypes and so on. But I'll give you an example from the Sioux tradition. The door directions, the direction where you face the actual entrance, has different meanings. So, for example, the north would be wisdom, the buffalo, or the colour white. The south, trust and innocence, which is green, or the mouse. The east, illumination or insight, which is yellow or eagle. And the west is a place of introspection, looking within, death and transformation, which would be the bear. So those animal archetypes are local to the Native American cultures. We may discover others from our lands. We don't have those animals here at this time. And as we know, working with symbols is a great way to create harmony and balance in us, and also a tool to enable us to centre ourselves in and live in those living archetypes. There was a good talk about archetypes yesterday. And archetypes to me are symbols that are alive and active in us and around us. So, let me see. I'll go into some health benefits of this, because I know some of you are quite scientifically minded in this conference. So, obviously we sweat a lot. Mainly when we sweat, we set potassium, sodium, urea, amino acids, glucose, magnesium, calcium, zinc, copper, cadmium, lead, aluminium, iron and nickel, and toxins in general. But when you raise the skin surface temperature from 32 degrees C, at room temperature, to 40 degrees or higher, it increases the blood flow to skin in quite a huge degree, from about less than 1 litre per minute to about 8 litres of your blood will go nearer the skin. So you're increasing cardiac output, vasodilation, you've got more oxygen going around the body, and also immune agents are carried to the skin. So the sweat lodge is very good for skin problems, good for wound healing, microbacterial skin infections, scabies, and fungal infections. Hypothermia now is used for treating cancer. It's not recognised in the UK, but one can go to Germany and have hyperbaric treatments, and they go to temperatures 42 degrees centigrade and above, and it's very successful for killing tumours. They usually use an infrared system. But why this, to me, this ancient technology has within it, to me, it has a very profound possible use for cancer in our society. I won't say it's going to necessarily cure it, but it may well have a role to play in that. Heat's not very good for herpes simplex, by the way. Physically, very good for arthritis, colds, insomnia, stress in general. Good for heart, but obviously caution's advised if you've got high blood pressure. And you do several rounds in a sweat lodge. Let's see, I'll leave that one. So each round, rocks are brought in, water's poured on, prayers are said, stories told. There could be rounds of silence, could be drumming, singing, just yelling your head off, getting stuff out. And it's very good for getting in touch with the heart and not the ego. So when one's in the lodge, sometimes I go to a lodge and I've got an idea of what my prayer might be, but once you're in there, the heat takes over. It's a great leveler, and this is what I particularly like about it, because it gets me out of my intellect and into my heart, and everyone in there is at the same level. And in addition to that, community, to me, is the key to our survival at this point in time, as ever. And it's a fantastic way of developing a communal spirit and creating strength in your community, and sharing your stories in a safe way. Very good for releasing toxic ideas, physical and mental, psychic toxins, moving on, getting things in perspective. One can use a lodge for asking for things to come in, or things that you desire in your life, or things that you'd like to let go of or change. But I do feel there's a need for meaningful ceremony, and what I think of as is really a death culture that we live in many ways, very destructive culture, for all its beauty. And so another thing is the continuity with ancestors, our ancestors, and honouring our ancestors. Without our ancestors, we wouldn't be here. And it's a way to sort of remember and honour our ancestors and our intrinsic nature, which they've passed on to us in some ways. And again, it's a way of breaking through preconceptions about what things are, but experience them directly. I came across sweat lodges in the 1980s. I trained as a shiatsu practitioner. I worked in the USA with people with HIV/AIDS, and I met someone called Barrett Eaglebear, who was a very inspiring woman. She was a Cherokee shamanka. She was an outsider. She was a bisexual woman, and so she was excluded from the tribe. And so, as you probably know about a lot of traditional shamanism, very often the shaman is an outsider figure. And so through that outsider status, you have insight into the tribe. And she took me on as an apprentice, and she was doing lodges with people. She'd do a woman's lodge, and then an HIV/AIDS lodge, and then a communal one. So the people with HIV/AIDS, she wouldn't get the temperature up very high. She'd have the door open the whole time. But her medicine was so strong, I could sit there and I could see this energy just coming through the lodge and through all of us. So you don't necessarily need high heat. When I do lodges, I like to make them fairly hot, because I feel that most of us need that to penetrate our armour. We're quite armoured in our culture in many ways. And to get through that and to create our non-egoic space for us. So I worked with her for several years, and I came back and built lodges in North London. I lived in Canterbury near Islington at the time, so I built one by the North London railway line, and then in Stamford Hill in a place that had several squats all linked together, because I was very much into being a kind of urban shaman and bringing this into the city. And it was quite successful. The only difficulty was that the preparation for sweat lodges is important as a ceremony. For example, you could spend a few days fasting to clear yourself and so on. But of course, people from the city would maybe come in, just a couple of hours earlier. They'd been, on the tube or something. So that I realised then I needed to be in more rural settings to do this. Although people do run lodges in cities, I know people are doing it in London. You need a nice garden, don't you? So let me see. And it's very good for substance abuse issues as well. I've discovered that, because obviously you can sweat out toxins, and also you can have a sense of shared community and be less isolated within your issues. Let me see. Right, so going back to the origins of lodges, these are people, I think these are Navajo people, and these teachings, as you may know, were suppressed by the colonial powers that be in the Americas, but they were practiced in secret in many tribes, such as the Crow, and the Sioux had real issues with the government, and so they had to do it in a very secret way. And the re-emergence of it really didn't start happening until the 60s and 70s, and after the Native Americans occupied Alcatraz Island in the Bay Area near San Francisco. And in doing that, they brought their plight to a lot of people's attention. And so, the kind of communities that sprang up in the USA, particularly after the 1960s sort of hippie era, in the early 70s, there was literally hundreds of thousands of people set up communities in America, in the USA, and would start doing sweat lodges. Thank you. So that there's another lodge there, preparation. So what happened there is that then there started to be more dialogue between the Native Americans and others about the lodges. There's lots of controversy within that culture, as with a lot of these things. But for me, I'm trying to create a way that we can do lodges with our own cultural integrity, what I call our own cultural integrity. In other words, get back in touch with the elder within us and with the shaman within us and within what is inside us, our ancestral heritage, which has been kind of subverted by all the invasions and religious things that have been imposed upon us through time. Got so much information, let's see how to synthesize it. Going to things relating to areas that you might find interesting relating to psychedelics and entoptics. In lodges, one can see, I see this very often, little blue lights, I call them fairies. And they're the kind of things I've seen on ayahuasca ceremonies, personally. Also colours and kind of different, the veils. You can see stuff in there in the darkness with your eyes shut. I know there's been many studies to do with melatonin, serotonin stuff being in darkness for several weeks and what that does to you. But you've got these factors of being in the dark in the womb of the mother, with all that potential. You've got the heat, you've got the community. And I do lodges at the first round. I will always do a physical round where one does a self-massage, and that gets everyone kind of in tune, and in addition starts to break down our more armoured, physically armoured personalities and bodies. And then we go on to have rounds of silence, singing, sharing, prayers, invocations, etc. Screaming your head off, I particularly enjoy. I mean, when I went through very difficult times, the lodge for me several years ago, the lodge for me really kept me going. It was like my church. And, just to be able to yell and get things out was very, very releasing and very helpful. And in addition, working with HIV/AIDS, sorry, I was very unclear there. The reason why I was very inspired by Barrett, my teacher, was that she was having incredible results with T cells, the T helper cells in the immune system. So people who are quite sick would go in there and their T cell count would go up, having done a sweat lodge. And some people who were quite physically, denuded and didn't have much energy would get quite energized from doing these ceremonies. But again, she'd keep the temperature down and treat them very gently. I did put in my abstract that I needed to talk about what I called the Sedona issues, and perhaps I should go into that a bit now. In 2009, there was something called a spiritual warrior retreat in Sedona. People were charged £10,000 to go on this retreat. Someone called James Arthur Ray, and you may have read about this. I used to be able to say in sweat lodges that you might feel like you're going to die, but no one's ever died in a sweat lodge. But I can't say that now, because this man, who was to me an example of the New Age movement in its most shadow sort of state, there's a lot of greed involved. These people did 36 hours of fasting, 2 days without water. Then they went out into the desert for a vision quest sort of night. Then a large buffet breakfast. And then this man had a very large lodge. He wanted to build a lodge to get 70 or 80 people in. In fact, there was about 50 in there. It was covered in plastic, rocks all around it, so there was no airflow at all. He got 100 rocks in 8 rounds. And he started to pour buckets of water on them. People were screaming and trying to get out, but he ignored their pleas for help. So 2 people died. And then 1 person was in a coma, died after a week. 18 people got burns, dehydration, kidney failure, and breathing problems because of this man's behaviour. I know it's a bit dark, but I just needed to clarify what happened. And the reason was really greed, ignoring people's needs, and being too egotistical. He then jumped the state line, but he eventually did about 85% of a 2-year sentence, and now he's out there again trying to promote himself. He was on a show that Piers Morgan did, that lovely man Piers Morgan, you might know of. He does a show in the States, a sort of celebrity thing. So Morgan's manager has raised current media contact. So I just wanted to mention him to clarify that there are issues, there have been issues in Native American culture about people, you know, such as myself running lodges, a Caucasian man who isn't from that culture. And James Arthur Ray hasn't done us any favours, but at the same time there are many people like me who are trying to do lodges in a very authentic way and discover, again, our own cultural integrity, what that is. Thank you. Rather than being just adhering to the symbols and archetypes of other cultures. And that's really my passion, is to try and enable myself and others to discover what that is through the Sweat Lodge ceremony. You build what I think of as the modern term, Rupert Sheldrake's term, morphic field in there. And so you are very much able to go further than you would on your own, as you can in an ayahuasca ceremony or a ceremony where you're just doing singing or chanting or working in a circle. It's very powerful medicine. Okay, anything else I need to say? The door generally faces east, but that doesn't, it can face really in any direction. There's different traditions. People in the northern USA will have their lodge facing south, many of them. But usually it faces east. That's the, where the sun rises, the illumination. So again, it's adding to that sort of power of the sun coming into the lodge. There's another lodge. There's a lovely lodge there. There's another one. There's people sitting around. It's a nice image. You can't see many people in these because you don't want to photograph people in ceremonies very much. So there's a few there sitting around the fire having done their lodge. Any questions?
Could I just
Yes.
briefly ask, how can people access sweat lodges in the UK and also, I guess, the ones you run? How can they find out about it?
Well, I've got a site called The Gift Sweat Lodge, and also on Facebook, The Gift. And I run lodges, thanks Kim, I run lodges in Sussex. It's a non-profit lodge. I also do them in a few other locations. And you can contact me through The Gift Sweat Lodge if you're interested.